December 14th, 2008. We're with the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. We have the pleasure of interviewing Peter Kurzburg, who's going to reflect on some of his memories of being in this building, the Lathrop house, and his going to the Lubavitch Yeshiva Academy here back in the 1950s and perhaps the 60s. So I'd like to start by asking Peter about himself, where you are in the world right now, and then we'll come back.
I currently live in Braintree. I'm married. My wife's name is Karen. We have two boys, Mark and Dan. Mark is a sophomore in college, and Dan is a senior in high school. We've lived in Braintree for about 15 years. Prior to that, we lived on Cape Cod. I'm currently the superintendent of schools in Braintree, was the assistant superintendent in Barnstable, Massachusetts. I was born in Springfield. My parents arrived in the United States in 1948. They were Holocaust survivors and came to the United States originally from Poland, then on to Austria, and then spent 8 years in England before arriving here. My first memories of the yeshiva were as a preschooler. My mother told me that I started here at the age of 3.
What year would that be approximately?
That would have been 1951. And my memories are of a yellow school bus coming to the house to pick me up. Rabbi Edelman rode on the bus at that time and picked the children up, and on the way home. The bus driver's name was Max, and I remember Max vividly because when he would drop me off, if my mother wasn't home, he would take me around, and once in a while he would buy children ice cream cones at the at a corner store. And actually, my first memories then of a classroom are in this actual room. This was either the preschool or the kindergarten classroom. My teacher was Miss Stam. That I found out later that was short for Stambovsky, but everyone called her Miss Stam. We had a relatively small class.
What was her first name?
Rose. First name was Rose, and she lived in Springfield as well, in the Forest Park area.
You had a small class.
We had a small class, and as I look back, it was probably the largest class because as I moved up into the grades, our classes would be perhaps with 6 students, 7 students that covered 2 or 3 grade levels. Rabbi Edelman, our school day was half the day was Hebrew, the other half was English. And so we learned how to daven, and we studied Chumash and Rashi and the Mishnayos and every morning. And then in the afternoon, we would have another teacher come in, and that's when we did our reading, math, science, social studies. We had honestly, I can't remember the names of my English teachers, but I do remember the rabbis that were here. There was Rabbi Edelman, then there was a Rabbi Friedman, who also taught here.
First name?
I wouldn't know his first name.
This is the Friedman family.
Mm-hmm.
And a Rabbi Engel.
What's your memory of these rabbis?
Always warm, nurturing individuals that I think just helped promote a very warm and positive atmosphere within the classroom, showed a great deal of love for the children. Some of the other random thoughts and memories of my experiences here are picnics on Log Bolmere. We would go as a class. That was a field trip. I remember Rabbi Edelman playing baseball with us. I remember him taking a group of us to a Farbrengen at 770 Eastern Parkway, where the Lubavitcher Rebbe was, in blessed memory. Rabbi Engel ran contests for us relating to our Hebrew studies. And then I remember one summer spoke to my parents about going to a camp up in the Catskills for it's either 1 or 2 weeks. It was I was about 13 at the time, and so it was a fairly religious camp. We davened 3 times a day, every day. I had just started putting on tefillin at the time, and I wanted to be with a friend of mine who had gone, and I would have been in another bunk, but they put us in the same bunk, so I was the only one who had to put his tefillin on every day for Shacharis services.
That's good modeling for the other ones.
It was the one thing I remember about Miss Stam, who everybody loved, that she always gave kisses on your nose, and we always left with a little red nose that was from the lipstick that she had on.
Who were your other teachers that you can remember? That's it.
I can't remember. There were frequent turnovers of English teachers, and whether it changed every year, and I can't surmise why, other than it was probably a half-time job, because everybody studied Hebrew in the morning. There were 3 classes upstairs, as I recall them.
What classes were there upstairs?
Well, it might have been 1st and 2nd grade, might have been together, 3rd and 4th, and then maybe 5th and 6th. It would just depend.
Did you use this building for davening at all on Shabbos, or just as a school?
Yes, there were services here, although I attended the Kadima synagogue. And I'm not really sure, only because it was closer to walk. It just would have been too far to walk here for services. And they had junior congregation at Kadima. Downstairs was junior congregation.
Before we go there, let's tell me about some of the fellow students you remember.
Some of the students, there was Elliot Levin, who I still believe lives in Springfield. There was Joseph Boxer, Mark Sadowski. Many of Rabbi Edelman's children were here at the same time. There was Seema and Cyril were close to my age. And then Israel Edelman was here at the time. He was younger, a little younger than I was. There was another daughter, I'm blanking on her name, that was...
Esther?
Esther. Yeah, so those are the 4 that I remembered. I think there were more children, but Esther. So those were the 4, and Vaxim and Cyril were probably in my class, different grade levels, but they were in my class.
As you look back on it, and you're an education person yourself, what was the quality of the education here?
the quality was very good. The one of the main things had to do with the individualized attention that you could get, because the classes were just so small, and so the teachers just knew where everybody was all of the time in terms of their learning and participating in activities. So there was a lot of one-on-one contact between the teachers and the students and the parents. So it was a very close-knit environment.
And were the parents actively involved in the school? Do you remember that? Was there a parents group or parents?
I don't remember a parents group. Yeah, see, I'm looking at this. This would have been the kindergarten class, and honestly, I don't remember many of these children.
Would you like to read
the
names?
Sure. There's a Amy Michelman, Ellen Katz, Michael Cohen, Joan Lefkowitz, Gary Lubarsky, Jerry Chelson, Sharon Wolf, Susan and Terry Pevsner. Those were twin girls, and I remember them and myself. So that was.
Which one are you in the picture?
I'm the one right in the front.
Can you hold
Smiling?
the picture up?
Sure.
I thought that was you.
I'm the student right up in the front.
On the front, smiling. So, I see English letters up on the wall.
Right, so that would have been kindergarten. Now, something that happened, and again, I don't remember all of the circumstances behind it, and my mother didn't know too much about it at the time either, but evidently they had done some testing with students. Someone had come in, I remember that. It was a stranger, but and the student, we just had to do things, whether it was games or whatever. And I know shortly after that, it would have been in the middle of the year, I was moved up into first grade. And that's why, and maybe I just don't remember any of these other students then being in any of my classes.
Got it.
Simon Fuchs was another student that was in my class.
Have you kept up with any of these people?
I've seen Elliot Levin, and the reason I ran into him, his mother, as far as I know, still had volunteered at the Jewish nursing home. And my mother was in the Jewish nursing home, and so that's how the connection came, and then by chance he might be at the nursing home and when I was there visiting.
Let's get back to your parents for a moment. Why did they choose Springfield as a place to move to back in after 1948, I think you said?
1948.
Yeah.
I had, my mother had two sisters living in Springfield.
What were their names? What are their names?
Yeah, Bertha Schlesinger was one of, she since has passed away, and the other sister was Ernestine Kadlicek, who also has passed away.
How did they happen to end up in Springfield, these two sisters?
Well, there were two other brothers that were here as well.
From your mother?
From my mother. She was a family of 5.
So two brothers were here already.
2 brothers were here.
Did they get out of Europe before the war?
One, they got out in the middle. They came here and ended up settling in New York. Arthur Mayer was one of the brothers, and Joseph Mayer was the other brother. So when my parents came over, they had to decide where do you want to live, and so my mother said, "I'll stay here. We'll stay here with my two sisters," and that's how they ended up. They just ended up and actually lived with one of the sisters when they first came for a short period of time.
Do you remember what your aunts did for a living here, or what their husbands did for a living in Springfield, and where they lived?
Yes. Initially, one of my aunts lived upstairs from us. Shortly, I'm not sure what the time frame was, but my parents bought a house on Malden Street.
And where is Malden Street approximately?
Off of Orange Street near Dickinson Street. And my aunt and uncle lived upstairs from us until such time as they bought their own home on Shawmut Street. My other aunt and uncle lived on Fountain Street, which is in that area.
Was that a very Jewish...
Washington Street School.
Oh, yeah.
It's somewhat in the Forest Park area, moving more towards East Long Meadow, but certainly well in the Springfield area.
And what did your father and mother do for a living, and what did your uncles do for a living?
My father was a chazan, but started out as a peddler when he came to this country. He was the chazan at the yeshiva, actually. Daven there.
He got paid for this. This was a live...
No, he did not. He did not get paid for davening at the yeshiva. For a number of years, he did travel around to other synagogues for the high holidays and daven there, where he did get paid, but he did not get paid for davening at the yeshiva.
And what did he peddle?
He started out, he had an uncle that lived in New Jersey, and when he came to this country, he said, "Max, I can get you some neckties." And he started peddling neckties door to door.
In Springfield?
In Springfield, and then started moving out. I remember him telling me that he just walked all day and would have a Coca-Cola for lunch or something.
He had a suitcase of neckties.
Started out with neckties and then slowly expanded as people said, "Well, what else do you have?" And he said, "Well, what would you want?" And so they started telling him, and so he started expanding that till such time as he was able to get a car, and then started driving, and actually ended up during part of the year peddling at tobacco camps.
Up north, up by Hadley or Connecticut
into
Valley.
Connecticut, and learned Spanish because many of the workers were from Puerto Rico, and they lived on the tobacco fields.
And what was he peddling to them?
Whatever they wanted, because they had no credit, they couldn't, so he started, "What do you need?" "I need shirts." So he would go and buy shirts and sell them to him on time. And so that's how he earned his living.
Did he?
It's an amazing story.
It is amazing. Did he open a store, or
No.
he did all peddling?
Everything out of his car.
Did you ever go along with him?
I did.
What was that like?
It was a hard job. I remember him, walking up 6 flights of stairs to apartments, selling, to his customers.
So he'd have a route.
He had a route. He developed a route and had customers all over, and it was really a very service-oriented business. What do you need? When are you going to be home? And he worked his schedule that way.
And he was able to really understand and converse with the people.
Able to understand, guaranteed everything for them, so that they trusted him. And
Up till when did he do this business? That was his whole life.
His whole life.
And he made an income. He made a living.
He did. Helped. My sister went to college. I went to college. They helped out with us. They fed us. They clothed us.
Where was he from in Europe? And what did he do in Europe? And what was his education like?
In Poland. He came from Poland. Some very obscure little town that you can't. I'm not sure it exists anymore, or that you can find anything about it. He left home at a very early age. He came from a poor family. All of his entire family was killed in the Holocaust. He began singing there. That's where he just had an innate ability for that, and was brought up in a Jewish environment.
Did he go to he went to yeshiva too, as far as you know?
Well, as to the extent that they had, yeshivas at that point, I don't know. I just know that he learned everything when he was there, and also studied cantorial.
Did he teach you chazanut also?
He didn't teach me. My memories are of him rehearsing in the kitchen every night. That was his passion. That was his love. So my mother then started working at Neisner's. It's a 5 and 10 cent store downtown. She worked in the stock room, and that was one of the reasons. I'm not quite sure how the connection happened between my parents and Rabbi Edelman, but I know that he said, "Have them come, to school," and then my mother started working. They just needed 2 incomes at that point to kind of make ends meet, and so she started working at Neisner's.
What kind of, is it 5 and 10?
It was a 5 and 10 store, and she was up on the 2nd floor or 3rd floor in the stock room. And I remember her bringing me there a number of times, particularly school was closed, and she had a work that she would bring me with her to. They had a soda fountain on the main floor, and that's what she did. And in Europe, she worked in it was like an accountant. She had at that time she said that they called them lifetime jobs. She had a lifetime job in this company. I know was very proud of the work that she had done there.
Poland also, she came from.
Came from Poland, but early on they went to Austria, to Vienna.
And both of your parents survived the camps, is what it sounds like?
They were arrested, but fortunately did not get to go to camps. They were arrested and released and given warnings to get out.
When did they get out?
They got out in 1940.
Were they together as a couple then?
They were together, but they got out separately.
They were arrested separately.
They were arrested separately and got out separately. My father was able to go to England through a Jewish men's organization.
Do you know what it was?
I don't.
They brought him out.
They
How about your mother?
My mother ended up getting a job as a housemaid
In England.
in England.
She was in Vienna when she was taken by the Nazis?
That's where she had been arrested
And she was able to be
Get
released
out.
and get out.
get out. Yeah. So they ended up going there separately. They were in different places in England.
But they had met each other before that.
Oh, right.
They were married.
They were married before. And then...
How did they meet again?
Well, they somehow they got in contact with each other, and my father then went to visit my mother there, and they couldn't get into they wanted to come to the United States, but there was a quota. They couldn't get in. And that's how they ended it. They said, we'll have to go to England.
What did they do in England for 8 years?
My father worked in a munitions factory. And my mother was a housekeeper. Yeah, and my sister was born there.
What's your sister's name?
Sylvia.
And where does she live and what does she do? And tell me about her family.
Yeah, she's older than I am. She's 8 years older than I am. She lives in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Was a school teacher and an administrator and has since retired. Has 3 children.
Did she go to the Shiva Academy too?
No, she didn't.
How come? Oh, because you hadn't, well, how come?
Well, I don't know, other than I don't know whether there was a sense that it was more for boys than it was for girls at that time.
Were there girls here when you went to school? There were, yes?
Well, there were, but see, after kindergarten, the only I'm just trying to remember. I'm not sure I remember any girls other than Rabbi Edelman's children, but I
After
may be
kindergarten,
wrong.
it may
There
have been
may
all
be.
it may have been all boys.
Well, there may have been girls, but I think I'm just not sure. I just don't remember the girls beyond Rabbi Edelman's daughters.
She has children?
3 boys. They're
Uh-huh.
all married. 2 have families. 1 recently got married. So, yeah, and they're in California, Washington, and West Hartford.
We like to ask to see how the transmission of our culture continues. If you could comment on your level of observance and the level of observance of your sister and her children. What do you see? How have you seen it continue?
Well, from my perspective, it has kind of faded in and faded out over time. And so right now, I'm fairly involved in the local shul in Braintree. And we have a part-time rabbi, so I fill in when the rabbi's not there, either in leading the services. I serve as a gabbai. I'll do the haftorahs if the person that does the haftorahs isn't there. Right now I'd say, generally I attend shul every Shabbos, unless there's, something else comes up. So that's my level right now. My sister attends. I can't tell you how often, but I know that we've always belonged to a shul, a synagogue, and her 3 boys also do. One is, I'd say, maybe more observant than maybe any of the rest of us are at this point. So I think we all still have our Jewish foundation and faith, and her sons all went to the Hebrew Academy in Bloomfield up until grade 8. So they didn't go into public school until high school. They went to Bloomfield High then from there.
I wanted to ask you about the experience of going from the Lubavitch Yeshiva Academy
Yeah.
to a regular junior high school. What was that like?
Well, it was, I mean, there were things, because we only had school for a half a day, you can't cram everything into a half a day so, music, for example, general music. Our music was Hebrew music, or formal art classes or formal physical education. Our physical education was recess. And but besides that, it was not a difficult transition at all.
Did you have many non-Jewish friends, or some? Can you recall in junior high school and high school, were you very conscious of being Jewish as a minority in the high school? Was that something you were aware of?
I knew Jewish students that either I had spent a couple of years at the Hebrew Day School at the Kadima in between all of this. It wasn't I didn't attend here strictly from age 3 up until what would have been 11. So I spent a couple of years there. I spent a lot of time at the Jewish Community Center here in Springfield or Long Meadow. And so I knew a lot of Jewish peers from that setting as well. And most of my social experiences were through the Jewish Community Center, spending time there to do things.
What do you remember about going to Kadima? Who was the rabbi, and what memories do you have of that shul or some of the people who stand out to you as...
Well, I had my bar mitzvah there.
What do you remember of your bar mitzvah?
And at the time, I do remember my bar mitzvah. Now the Kadima, at the time, and I don't know whether it always stayed that way, the women sat up above in the balcony, and all of the students, we sat in like the last 2 or 3 rows, and Pollock, I remember a Mr. Pollock. He may have been the gabbai there as well. And there were a few rabbis. Rabbi Weisvogel. Rabbi Weisvogel was there when I had my bar mitzvah. And I remember at the time, I did a good part of the service. What you could, as much as you could do, is what they would allow you to do. And I think I read the first 4 parshas of the Torah.
Did you give a devar too?
Not in the shul. I don't recall. If I did, I don't remember.
Where was the reception held?
Park Manor. Park Manor was the place, the only place where you could have a kosher event. And so it seemed like everybody had their bar mitzvah parties at the Park Manor on Saturday night.
And where was that located?
It's actually probably right around the corner from here. What's the main street that goes, as you get to the lights, if you take a right and you follow that down, it would have been on the left-hand side.
They had weddings there? That was the place where you had functions?
Well, I only knew it as a place for bar mitzvahs, but it was a function hall with kosher food.
What happened I asked you that you wanted to talk about?
I'm sorry.
Is there something else that you wanted to talk about that?
No, only that I had nothing but very fond memories coming to the yeshiva, and I think it really formed the foundation and established the roots for me that I know that I've carried with me throughout my life. Again, I think as you go through life, there are some things become more important, some things are less important for periods of time, and I keep coming back to the environment that I was brought up with here and in conjunction with my family, and as I think about it now, my parents were just so thrilled to be here that there weren't many people, although all of their friends were in similar situations that had come over. It's sort of like, children of survivors. But outside of that, as you grew up, many of the individuals that you interacted with had very different experiences growing up because their parents were already, they had been here either for generations and were assimilated already into the country. My parents were not. They were becoming assimilated, but they never left anything that they had. They brought it all with them here.
They were able to really maintain the same traditions that they had over in the old country.
Yeah. And so, and I think, having all of the experiences that they had, they were very protective. And they just didn't do the things that you would see people and parents in this country doing. They had not become Americanized in that sense.
Were you aware of that growing up, that your parents were different?
I was. Yeah, I was, and I didn't view it as a good thing or a bad thing, but I just knew that it was different. It was different, and so and as I look at my children now, and they did get to know my mother, but I can see that they are one generation removed now. They are fully assimilated into. Not that I'm not, but I have pieces of me that come from someplace else than just my experiences in the United States. So that's at least a portion of my story.
I want to thank you very much.
No, my pleasure.
Today's December 14th, 2008. We're at the Lathrop house, and I'm talking with Marion Pava. So Marion, would you tell me something about your childhood, where you were raised, what part of Springfield, and your early memories of Springfield? Yeah, you told me you're about 80 years old. So that would mean
definitely,
so you were born around 1928.
Eight.
Okay.
I was born in 1928. I'm as old as the Oscars.
Tell me about the 1930s in Springfield. Where were you born, first
Okay,
of all?
I was born in Springfield.
Where?
I actually was born on Algonquin Street, which is off of Carew Street, in that area where the Shriners Hospital is. And then we moved. There's 6 children in the family, and I was the youngest girl, and then I had a younger brother after myself. And we moved to 574 Chestnut Street, which is across from the Beth Israel, which they called the Big Shul, and Rabbi Shenkoff was the rabbi there.
In the North End?
In North End.
Keep going.
And I went. We had an Orthodox family. My mother and father were Orthodox. My father came from Glusk, I believe, and my mother came from Babrusk in Russia. And the only relatives that my mother had were still back in Russia. She had sisters and brothers. And my father had a sister here. That was the only close relative we had, and I had 2 cousins from that relationship. But our family, my mother observed Shabbos, and I went to Hebrew school. I had private lessons.
Where'd you go to Hebrew school?
I went to, I got private lessons from Rabbi Zagorin, and there was another, it slips my mind, he was right in the neighborhood. And by 11 and 12, I was reading Yiddish. I was reading the foreword, and they had services at the Beth Israel every Shabbos, and we went there. And it was, the whole neighborhood was like a little Jewish ghetto. Everybody knew each other. They had 2 or 3 butchers on Dwight Street, which wasn't very far from Chestnut Street. And they had bakery, and they had Bernstein's Market, and they had Libby's soda shop, where they got the egg, where they malted with I forgot the
Egg creams.
Egg creams. They had egg creams there, and it was a very safe neighborhood. And I went to 2 different schools. One to Jefferson School, kindergarten, and then I went to Lincoln School, and then Chestnut Middle School, and then on to Commerce. And my father died when I was 9 years old, so it left my mother with older children and younger children. And my brother was only a year and a half when my father died.
What did your father die from?
He died from undiagnosed tuberculosis.
Really?
They thought it was a sinus infection, and it never got better. And so there were tough times, but I didn't feel like there were tough times. I felt very secure, very loved.
How did your mother support the family?
My older sister, who was 13 years older than I, and my 2 brothers worked, and she also got money, I think, from the welfare, or what, I don't know if they called it welfare, but she did get some.
This is in the 1930s.
This is in the 1930s.
What did your
My
father
father died in 1936.
What did your father do for a living?
My father worked in the railroad, on the railroad. And his father and mother, he was a peddler, you know.
Your grandparents?
My grandparents.
In Russia?
No, in
Here?
Yeah, my grandparents.
Where?
On Grosvenor Street, off of, in the little Jewish ghetto area.
What did they peddle?
I think I think it was junk, you know. I think it was a junk peddler.
Do you remember
And
them at all?
No. I remember my grandmother because she outlived my father, his age. She was 92 when she died. My father was 46. So, I don't remember I don't remember them as a couple because I think I was born after my grandfather died.
Remind me again, what year did your family come to Springfield?
1923.
From where'd they come from?
They came from Babruysk. My mother came from Babruysk, and I think my father came from Glusk.
Did they come directly to Springfield?
They came, yes, they came directly to Springfield.
Why'd they come to Springfield? There was some family here?
Yes, there was either there were landsmen, there were, people they knew told them to come to Springfield.
And your grandfather came along?
My
grandparents came along with your...
They may have come a little earlier. They may have come maybe earlier.
Your grandparents. And
yeah.
then your father came.
Then my father came. And my mother was pregnant. She came with 3 children, and she was pregnant with my sister. And she had a terrible time getting here.
Why?
She, well, first of all, they left in the middle of the night from Russia. And they went on a boat. And I remember she said my brother started to whimper. And she had to tell him to stop, otherwise they would have been found and thrown overboard. So she just hushed him and covered him up, and he quieted down, but that was a very tense moment there. And she said from there they went to Paris, and then from Paris, they got on a boat and came here. But I remember she said when she was in Paris, she bought a hat, a fashionable hat.
Uh-huh.
But they came here and they struggled, but they had family and people that they knew from their little shtetl, and they survived.
Who do you remember from your childhood? What friends did you have? You remember some of your friends?
Yes.
Their names?
I remember, I lived in an apartment, so everybody knew everybody.
What was the street again?
574 Chestnut.
Okay.
And next door was Carol Smith and her brother, Calman. And in the apartment was Ann Goldberg, Ann Shapiro. There were Blonstein girls. There were upstairs. Oh, there was Berkowitz's lived upstairs. I think I mentioned the Goldbergs. The Rice family on the first floor. And, you hung out your wash and everybody knew everybody. It's a four-story old apartment. And you knew your friends from school.
Tell me about your siblings. What became of them?
My older sister got married actually the year that my father died, in 1937. And she married and moved to Hartford. And my 2, they both went in the service. My brothers worked. One worked as an usher at the Arcade Theater, and also in the clothing business. And my other brother was a jeweler repairer.
In Springfield?
In Springfield. And then there was my sister Bess, who just passed away last year. She worked as a bookkeeper in Mass Wholesale Drug Company for years and years. And She was 5 years older than I was. And then my little brother, who is a genius, he is now working for the National Energy Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, and he travels all over the world. He's a scientist, and he just got a wonderful, very proud of him. He just got a reward from the president of Italy in science and tech and chemistry. And then there's me, and I went to high school, and I got married very early.
How'd you meet your husband?
I met my husband at was called 5 Mile Pond. He was home on furlough in 1945. I had just graduated high school, and I was there with a bunch of girlfriends, and he was on furlough.
Wearing his uniform?
Well, at the time he was wearing a bathing suit, and I had a two-piece red bathing suit. And we spotted each other, and I thought he was pretty cute. He must have thought I was. And one of the girls that I was with said, "Don't you know who that is? That's David Pava. His brother works." I worked after school at Mass Wholesale Drug Company in the office. He said his brother, who's going to pharmacy school, works in the back. So the next day I went and I asked Sam, I said, "Do you have a brother that was at 5 Mile Pond yesterday?" He said, "I have 3 brothers." Sam was not too didn't want to commit to anything. So I said, "Will you tell him that the girl in the two-piece red bathing suit was me and you know her?" Well, the next day he came back. "He wants your address, your phone number," and that's how it started. He was home on furlough for 30 days. And for a year and a half we, had a relationship. He was in the Army. And we got married in December of 46.
Where did you live?
I moved to Indianapolis because David went to chiropractic college to get his degree in chiropractic.
And what did he do with it?
And actually it wasn't legal at the time.
Really?
In 1946. So he thought perhaps after going to school for 4 years, the Massachusetts would pass the law, and they didn't. And he did open up an office, but he couldn't really advertise, and we lived with his parents. So he decided to give it up. And he got into the insurance business for a while, and then he became the field director of the American Cancer Society for the whole state, and he traveled. And he developed professional people to do volunteer work, set up units in the whole state.
In the hospitals? Where were the units set up?
Yeah, hospitals and...
To work with cancer patients?
To form groups that
Support groups?
Form groups that would develop money raising. Fundraising. And also groups that would go out and with what's the word I'm looking for? Just public information. There was a lot of different groups they were mostly professional people that were volunteering their time. He did that for 20 years.
What did you do during this time? What did you do?
I, before I retired, I worked for Monarch Life Insurance Company, pension consultant, and then I retired in 89, and David retired in 87. And we had 2 sons, and one is a clinical psychologist at Mass General, and he also has a private practice in Newton. And my other son is struggling. He's had some problems, so he's in and out of work. And
where does he live?
He lives in Watertown, Massachusetts. So, and I have 3 grandsons from one son who is married. That's the doctor. And they're both two out of college and one going in next year.
What was the level of observance that you had in your parents' house, you growing up?
When I was growing up, everybody worked, so there was no. My mother made Friday night, and had Shabbos, and it was Shabbos as far as she was concerned. But the kids all worked, we all worked, and so there was really not that much. I kept a kosher house, and David came from a very Orthodox family, and I continue to have an Orthodox family, an Orthodox household.
You did?
Yeah, and but the boys, it means a lot, and what they think when they think back, they enjoy all the memories of what we had, and they observe, and Joel, my son, makes a beautiful Seder, but I wouldn't say that they're not Orthodox. They belong to Reformed. They've just jumped up.
Jumped up.
They've jumped up.
Where did you go daven when you went to shul here? Where were you a member?
Beth Israel,
Uh-huh.
and then Kadima. My husband and I belonged to Kadima because we moved to Long Meadow.
What made you decide to leave Beth Israel and go to Kedim?
No, Beth Israel. When I got married, I moved away, and Beth Israel eventually got sold to a church, and so a lot of the people from the North End moved up to the Forest Park area.
And so you went to Kadima.
So I went to Kadima because that was the Orthodox.
But Beth Israel did move. There is a bit, right?
Oh yeah, Beth Israel did move to Long Meadow, correct. But my allegiance was with the Pavas,
Uh-huh.
at Kadima. So I never went back to Beth Israel.
Are you still involved with Kadima?
Oh, very much so.
Tell me what kinds of involvement, what you do with them.
Well, I'm on the Chesed committee, which is it's a wonderful committee. They take care of bereavement dinners, the Shabbat dinners. We visit the ill. We send cards. We make phone calls. And what else do I do for Kadima? I go to services every Saturday. And trying to think. It's just like a family there. Everybody. It's a nice social getting together after Kiddush, and making friends. And I enjoy the service, and I love the rabbi. I like Rabbi Hyman very much.
Have you noticed a change in the numbers of people coming to shul on Shabbos?
Oh yes.
How many people come now on an average Shabbos?
Well, now that we merged, with Kesser, we're getting maybe a dozen more from them. But yesterday, I counted the women. There were only 18 women yesterday. There was a wedding out of town, so a lot of people were away. So, but the men, I don't know, when you gather around the Kiddush table, it seems like it grows, But maybe there were 75, 50 people yesterday. Mm-hmm. Not even that, no. I'd say there were 50 yesterday. Yeah.
Where have the people gone to? What's happened to the numbers?
Well, a lot of the people have passed on. The old members, have passed on. And younger families are coming in, and a lot of them are making aliyah. It's a constant changing thing now. It's I think the young people are going. The Orthodox people will stay at Kadima. Young people. But I think the trend is toward Sinai and Bethel.
Why is that?
Why is that? I think the younger people look for stimulation. It's like, my grandchildren, when I used to want to take them to show when they came, they'd say, boring. It's a repetitious thing, and there's no music. I mean, we don't have a cantor anymore, but there's nothing really to. It's them. It's the prayer book and them, and it's repetitious over and over. And there's no stimulation. They're looking for stimulation.
Excitement, music,
Yeah,
drama.
music, yeah, they really are.
Where are you living now? What part of Springfield?
No, I'm living in
Longmeadow. What part of Longmeadow?
I live off of Wolf Swamp Road. I've been there since 1958.
Are there a lot of Jewish people in your neighborhood?
There were more. The neighborhood's changing.
How is it changing?
There are younger couples moving in.
Not Jewish.
Not Jewish. In my area. Maybe there's younger Jewish professionals, doctors that are moving in maybe in a different area than I am. But when I moved in, everybody on the street was Jewish except one family. But now there's only 3 families. It's a small street. There's 9 families, but only 3 are. And we're all widows.
So you see a dramatic change.
Oh yeah. So I do. I mean, now we're going through such a. It's very sad, to see what's happening to the Orthodox community here. 3 shulls, trying to get together, and it's not easy. It's a very. And I feel very bad for the people who live around. This is a gorgeous area right here. But you can't support the show. The show it needs a lot of money. So I really don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. So I'm ending on a sad note about, what's happened.
But they're all going to move together to B'nai Jacob, right?
I don't think so. I don't think they're all. I mean, the people in the area do not want to leave, so
there'll be a small shul here.
There'll be a small shul here. Yeah. So we'll be split up.
So you've really seen the Jewish community in Springfield change from when you were a child of the 30s
oh, absolutely.
to now.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Would you ever have imagined that this could happen?
No, because when you're a child and you're right in the mix of it, you just think it's going to be forever. Until you get older, nothing is forever.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
December 14th, 2008. I'm here with Diana Henry, and we're talking about the Lathrop house. Tell us about what the building looked like and how come you bought it. What was your idea in buying this very historic building?
Well, I came to Springfield and I wanted to be in the Jewish community. And I looked around Forest Park and I thought I'd like to stay at a B&B here while I'm looking for a house. And there was no B&B. And so I was kind of sad. I had to go to West Springfield to some rat trap hotel, a motel. So when I was looking for a house, I actually saw this house before it came on the market. And the real estate agent said it's coming on soon. And I looked at it and I thought, gee, this is a beautiful place for my cousin. And I took pictures and I brought them up from Newport to see the house. And then I thought, they said, we're not leaving Newport. And then I thought, well, maybe if I have a different idea of myself, I could buy this house. And so I bought the house. And the idea of having a B&B was, I guess, already there because I had wanted to stay at a B&B. So being near the synagogues, 2 synagogues at the time, Kessler and Kadima, and my friends Ken, Schoen, and Jane having shown me the neighborhood previously, I knew this was the neighborhood. I knew it was the Jewish community I wanted to be in.
What year did you buy this? When did
2001, I closed on the house September 10th. The moving van arrived September 11th at 9 in the morning. And the truck driver told me he would not start unloading the furniture until I got him a certified check. So I went to the bank, and while I was at the bank, the banker ran out and said a plane just hit the World Trade Center. So I'll never forget the day I moved into the house. The first night I owned the house, the night of September 10th, I actually came and stayed with you, Ken and Jane, because I didn't want to be alone in the house with no furniture.
What did the house look like inside? Was it run down? Was it a wreck?
The house was really nice. It was mostly the way it is now. The people, I think, had done about 95% of what you see inside. It needed a new heating system. It needed a new roof. It needed to be painted. So there were major things that needed to be done, but the inside was very nice.
When you bought it, did you know its history?
When I bought it, I did not know the history. I didn't know that it had been LYA or Temple Sinai. I didn't know it had been an art school. And so actually the first New Year's I was here, I invited some people, including Belrita Novak, who knows a lot about the community. And we were sitting at dinner for New Year's Eve, and she said, "Oh, someone died in this house." And I said, "Oh, where?" And she said, "Oh, well, I don't want to tell you." I mean, it could spoil things for you. And I said, "If you don't tell me where he died, I'm going to think he died in every room. So it's better if you tell me which room, that way I'll know." So she told me which room. And she said he died very peacefully. He was the owner of the art school. And he had gone up for a nap, and his wife had made dinner and told their daughter to go and wake him up. And he was not alive any longer.
When was it in art school? What period?
It was an art school, I think, after the yeshiva and before it became the Griffin residence, which is what it was for 17 years before I bought it.
I mean, the Griffin family lived here?
Griffin family lived here. Fran and Patrick Griffin.
Why'd they sell the house?
They basically were, their children had grown up. They were all adults, and the two of them had separated, and she was living on the top floor here, and he was living on the ground floor with the kids in between. And so I guess after the kids grew up, they decided to move to separate quarters completely. So,
Tell me about the Jewish community as you've seen it now. You've been here 7 years.
Yeah.
It's gone through a lot of changes.
Yeah, when I came here, it was a thriving Jewish community. There were 2 shuls, Kessler and Kadima. And it was a very, it was a very vigorous community, I thought. I mean, I had heard that Kadima had been more thriving, that there had been more activities and school and so on there, but to me it seemed very lively, and new people were moving into the area all the time, and mostly Orthodox young families who found the housing very affordable here, the big houses with many rooms for their children and access to the shuls, and so I immediately joined Kadima when I first came, and then I also joined B'nai Jacob because I was told B'nai Jacob was about to fold. So in my usual spirit of contradiction, I went and joined them right away. So I belonged to two shuls at the beginning. And then I went on the board. I was asked to be on the board of Kadima, and I was on the board of Kadima for 2 or 3 years. And then I left Kadima, and I joined Kesser Israel, and which I had originally wanted to join when I first came also. And I had a meeting with Rabbi Edelman, and I was very touched by his manner. But at the same time, he was not, there was some part of the interchange that made me feel that he might not be as open to a single mom with one child as Kadima, which has a wonderful youth director, Yaakov Asselman. And I wanted my daughter to be under Yaakov's spell. So, and she did love being part of the young peoples. And the young people here on Shabbat, when I first joined Kadima, I could sit out on my porch on Shabbat and people would walk by and invite me to lunch. And you would see the young people roving around on Shabbat in groups, you know, going from one house to another as they visited their friends on Saturday afternoon. So it was really a nice community for young people. And but as my daughter grew up, I felt that I really could join Kesser. And some things happened at Kadima that were not so happy. There was a minyan that had started, sort of an ad hoc minyan that met only very occasionally, that was an egalitarian minyan. I think a Shir Hadash tradition minyan. So the women had aliyahs, not the first aliyah, but they also read from Torah and they gave the Devar Torah, but there was a mechitza in the sanctuary. And so I participated in that minyan. And there was a tremendous sort of backlash at Kadima because of this minyan, and which included people shaking their fingers at me, and the rabbi speaking from the bima the day the minyan that occurred while we were somewhere else, was talking about us having this minyan and how wrong it was. And so I kind of was offended by the process that had happened around that, as I'm sure they were offended by what we were doing. So I joined Kesser, where I felt there would not be any judgment. There might be judgment, but it wouldn't be expressed from the bima in front of the congregation. So I joined Kesser, and I was a member of Kesser for, I guess, the last 2 or 3 years that Kesser existed. And then when Kesser closed, which was on Simchat Torah, right after Simchat Torah, a couple of years ago, the Kesser group continued to meet as a minyan here at the Lathrop house. And we met here until Rabbi Edelman found his position in Florida. So actually we only met here for the first 3 months of that time, and then the minyan moved to the Lermans, to Alan and Eileen Lermans down on Sumner Ave. And so so we met here for 3 months, right when Kesser closed, and then the next 6 months we met at the Lermans. And then the minyan closed down when Rabbi Edelman went to Florida. And so, the house was once again a house of worship for a short time. It was very nice. The women sat in the dining room, and we had a lace curtain across the door of the dining room, and the men were in the living room with the Torah right in the foyer in front of the tapestry. And so the men could come in the front door, the women came in the back door, except that people kept getting mixed up, so people kind of came in anyway. And then we had a big kitchen, so we would prepare the kiddush in the kitchen, and when services were over, not before, we would move the food into the dining room where the women were, and then everyone would come in and sit down for kiddush. And we continued the Kesser tradition of sit-down kiddushes, which we also did at the Lermans when it moved to the Lermans.
So hopefully when Kadima closes one day,
Yeah.
there will be a continuation of the service.
Oh, there will be. I'm convinced that this is not whatever upheaval is going on now with a supposed move to Long Meadow for the Alliance of Orthodox Congregation. There will continue to be a minyan here in Forest Park, whether it's under the auspices of the Alliance, which is pledged to support such a minyan, or whether it's a new minyan, remains to be seen. But, people have talked to me about coming back here for minyan when this all plays out. I don't know.
Does it seem to you that it may not happen, that Kadima closes?
It would make sense that Kadima not close, because I don't think they can sell it. And the facility is there, and the rabbi's there, and the community is here. But there is the countervailing power of money. And the person who is playing the money card wants the synagogue to be in Long Meadow and does not want the community to be in Forest Park. And that's, so all the money may go to Long Meadow eventually. And what they'll do with Kadima, I don't know. It depends how strongly they really want to will away the community of Forest Park. And if they want to will it away to the extent of shuttering Kadima, even though the community is still here, then there will be a different minyan, different organization.
Are Jewish folks still moving into the area?
I don't know Forest Park.
Are Jewish folks leaving Forest Park?
People are leaving Forest Park, definitely.
Where are they going?
Definitely.
You know some names?
Yeah, I've lost a couple of names, but there are people who've left.
And they've moved
Definitely.
to other areas?
Yeah, they moved to Ohio, they moved to New
A
York.
consequence of what's happened here?
Yeah. Yeah. They've moved to West Hartford. They've left Long Meadow, too. The people who've gone to West Hartford left Long Meadow. The owner of You Save Auto Rental moved to West Hartford.
Tell us about your business here. How do you get people to come to what's your...
Well, it's a kosher bed and breakfast, so it is certified by the Vad HaKashrut of Springfield. And I'm certified for breakfast only. So if I do other kinds of catering, I need to have a mashgiach here. But I get most of my business from the internet. I advertise on Jewish websites like Shamash, but I don't really pursue that form of advertising very much. Mostly I advertise on non-Jewish bed and breakfast websites. Bedandbreakfast.com is the main one. And so through them, I'm also on Expedia and Hotels.com, so people can book rooms directly from the internet. And through that, I'm on the GPS systems for Springfield. So if people are looking in their GPS for hotels in Springfield, they can call me, they find me, so which is interesting. And I just looked in I keep a database of my guests. I saw that what I thought was the case About 15% of my guests are from guests. So it's not a large part of my business, but it would be a significant loss if the Minion ever completely went away. Because people do come here so that they can walk to shul on Shabbat. So, for instance, right now I have an Orthodox Jewish man from Israel who's a doctor who comes to pinch hit at the Bay State Medical Center, and he's so he comes back early on Friday afternoon since it's winter, and he's at shul on Shabbat and participates in the daily minions too when he can. So the bed and breakfast, I don't seek out Jewish guests because, to tell you the truth, it's more complicated and more time consuming to have from guests. There's always the question, even though my website is very self-explanatory about what people need to bring. They can have their kosher meals, they just can't cook in the kitchen, but they can bring already prepared meals. They can use the dining room table for Shabbat. I asked them to bring their own ritual items, their candles, their Kiddush cup. I provide washing cups, I provide kosher lamps. I, of course, provide the lighting, left on and so on in the Shabbat atmosphere. But it still is a lot more work, more of my time, more of my effort and energy to have people basically in the house and requiring service for 24 hours rather than having guests who just come, have breakfast, and leave. So I don't seek out this clientele, although I'm very happy to have them.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years from now?
I don't know if I'm going to be still in the bed and breakfast business. Making beds is very taxing physically.
You do all the work yourself?
I do everything myself. Cleaning, website, marketing, press releases, writing articles to create buzz, creating events like this that are, create some buzz for the bed and breakfast. In 10 years, I was thinking I would be living off of the income of my photographs, which are historic and are really very good. And I'm gaining more and more interest and support for those. People email me a lot for my photographs, and someone just emailed me last night who said he was interested in my work and what size groups do I speak to and so on. His name is Hefner, Robert Hefner. But his initials are HH. And I'm thinking, who is this person really? So I wrote a fairly, nice note, but nothing too in-depth. And I said, I'd like to know more about you and what is your interest? Perhaps you'll help me develop an idea. So I don't know who this person is. But I do get invited to speak about my work and get paid to speak about it.
And your work has to do with the history of the women's movement in America.
Well, my work, I started photographing at the Harvard Crimson when I was there, graduated in 69. So from 67 to 69, I was a photographer at the Harvard Crimson. Actually, we called ourselves photo editors. And then I went on to photograph democratic politics in the early 70s. And then by the late 70s, I had positioned myself as a photographer of women with a specialty photographing women. And then I had been since 72 Bella Abzug's photographer and Liz Holtzman's photographer. And then I became, through Bella, the official photographer for the First National Women's Conference, which is my most important body of work as far as publication goes. And then in the 80s, I went on to photograph one-room schools and school teachers, which I exhibited at the Brattleboro Museum in Vermont, and got a grant from the New York State Council on the Arts to photograph. And so my career basically included those various movements. as well as party photography for the rich and famous in New York, the Malcolm Forbes family, and so on. And then I was married in '87 and moved to California and moved into a different phase of teaching photography, which I had also done at the International Center of Photography in New York for 5 years when it first opened. But I continued that in California. And then I moved into teaching French, which I still do. So I'm teaching French at Trinity and Springfield Technical Community College, and I've taught French at Westfield State, American International. So I've taught French around the area and may continue to do that. I mean, that's an easier job than bed and breakfast. At the same time, bed and breakfast sort of gets under your skin, so I don't know.
You like being a hostess?
Yeah, I like being a hostess. I'm also good at it. So it's, you can get some rewards from what you're good at. So we'll see. I really don't know. The future's kind of nebulous right now, and I think a lot of that has to do with the condition of this country and the world. So I think a lot of my doubts about my career really are tied into doubts about what the economy is going to bring, and also my doubts about the women's movement and democratic politics and all of the causes that I photographed and supported with my imagery in the 70s, and now looking back on it and wondering, where did that go? Where did the idealism go? And that it's produced, no offense, but a street thug from Chicago as our next president. And, what has become of the women's movement that couldn't support a woman candidate for vice president? And the economy is, I don't know whether it can support my photography now. The galleries in New York are very interested, but they all say we have to think about our artists first. I was invited to speak at Vanderbilt University this February, and I just got an email saying the university is rethinking its financial situation. We've been asked to put all of our speaker invitations on hold until we can see what kind of a budget is left for speakers. So a big university like that doesn't have $1,000 for a speaker, I think maybe the time has passed for my photography to be, lucrative. Hopefully I'll find a home for it, and there'll be some place where it can be housed, where eventually historians will be able to refer to it.